I married somewhat late in life, at least by society's standards, and if I were to be honest, the reasons that led up to my marriage weren't ones I anticipated or ever imagined. I met my husband at a bar on a night out. I worked as a freelance graphic artist, and this meant that I had a lot of my time to myself. I went out of the house at least once in 2 weeks. I was what they called a homebody. I didn't like to leave the house, but I knew it was necessary, hence my bi-weekly adventures. That day, I'd gone out for drinks with my friends. Unlike me, they had married fairly early and had built their little families. I always felt like the odd woman out. They were getting calls from their partners about their kids, and I just sat there, listening. They complained about how their husbands acted and how their in-laws inconvenienced them. It was a lot, but it was something. The only thing I had to talk about was work, and I knew when I stopped being listened to. I stopped sharing beyond the simple common courtesy. I knew they didn't isolate me intentionally, but it couldn't be helped. That day, we sat at a little table by the window. It was Friday evening, and the place wasn't crowded yet. The other women left to go to their homes early, and I moved to the bar. Before I knew it, I was 3 shots in. A man sat by my side, but I did not pay attention to him. "Hey, how's it going?" he said in greeting, and I looked up at him. "Going well, I guess. What's a beautiful woman like you doing all alone by yourself?" That got a laugh out of me. It had been a while since I got attention from a man. "I'm David." "What's your name?" "I'm Clara." The conversation stayed on. We spoke about everything from our careers to food. The conversation turned so bright, and we both mentioned that we were single at the moment. I wasn't looking to get married. I wanted to share that kinship with my friends, but I wasn't desperate for it. Before I knew it, I had agreed to go on a date with David. I went home that night with something to look forward to, and it felt nice. The day of the date came, and I dressed nicely. The whole process of getting ready was euphoric. It had been a long time since I dressed up, intending to look pretty, and I was having the best time. David picked me up, and we drove off. The night had been pleasant. Our relationship grew from there, and a year later, he proposed. I said yes. That was 4 years ago. The first 2 years of our marriage had been one of the best of my life. David was everything I could have ever wanted in a husband and partner. He was attentive and caring, making sure that I had anything I could ever want, even though I had my own money and could comfortably care for my needs. He made sure to make me feel like a princess. I was pampered and taken care of. We saved money together so we could buy ourselves a home in a few years. Then, everything changed. We'd been trying for children all this time. I wanted to have children, or at least I thought so. We didn't start trying until a year after our marriage. He had said we should have ourselves for a year before introducing new family members, and I agreed. At that time, I had thought that I wanted children too. When we started trying, nothing happened. We felt that it meant we should try harder. I studied my cycle, and we tried when I was ovulating, but to no avail. I didn't take in. We went to see a doctor, and that was when we figured out the problem. I was infertile. I didn't know what type of person it made me, but when I heard that, all I felt was relief. Then, I realized that I hadn't really wanted to raise children, but I didn't mention that to David, thinking it would tear us apart. Perhaps I should have. David hadn't needed any help in being torn away from me. Perhaps he blamed me for killing his dreams of fatherhood. I didn't know, but he withdrew from me and the life we had built. My caring and doting husband became a stranger I lived with. He started to spend all his time at work and stayed away from me when he got home. He stopped eating the meals I prepared and ordered takeouts. I tried to start conversations with him, to no avail. He was done with me. He couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. I cried every day for the first 3 months. I had no idea what to do to take us back to where we were. I wanted my husband and partner back. I wanted the love we had to be resurrected. The day I knew it wasn't going to happen was when David returned home happy. He had a smile on his face, and his dark and scary mood from before had disappeared. I smiled and approached him, eager to have my husband back, but when he saw my face, he pushed past me and went to his room. My heart broke at that moment, and I knew my husband had found another woman with whom he could share his love and affection. He walked out of his room and approached me, scared. I moved back, but he scoffed and shook his head at me. My father is coming over this weekend. He's been an indefinite amount of time here, just thought you should know. He didn't even wait for an answer before he coldly walked out. David's father, Richard, arrived at our apartment on Friday night. David was at home that day, a deviation from his usual absence. When I saw Richard, he hugged me tight and told me he had missed me. The relationship between Richard and I was pleasant. He had lost his wife early when David was just a teenager to cancer and had stayed on, engaged. He was kind and made me laugh. After the initial pleasantries, David stayed for dinner for the first time in a while, but after we were done, he stood and went out. He informed his father that he wouldn't be around till the next morning and told Richard to make himself comfortable. The tension, or lack of it, between us was clear, and Richard picked it up. After David left, Richard and I sat together in the sitting room and watched a simple movie, a rom-com. The company felt nice. It had been a while since I had sat with someone else. I had been avoiding my friends because I didn't want to have to recall everything that had happened in the past months. It was funny that when I married David, I was finally welcomed into their fold because I had a husband like them. I wondered if my privileges would be revoked when they figured out I couldn't keep my husband. I must have gotten lost in thoughts because I was startled back to the present when Richard tapped my arm. "Clara, is everything all right? I've been calling your name for a minute or two, but you haven't responded. I'm worried." I looked at him and tried to smile, but all it did was provoke all the tears I'd been holding in. The floodgates broke, and I was inconsolable. Richard drew me into him and held me till I cried all my heart out. I broke down and told him everything, and he admitted that his son had told him. He confessed that it was one of the reasons he had come here. He couldn't control the actions of his adult son, but he let David know he wasn't in support. He confirmed my fears that David was indeed seeing someone, and that was where he had spent all this time away from me. As Richard told me everything, I realized that I wouldn't ever get the life I had back with David, and that it was time to move on. It wasn't easy to admit, but once I did, it felt like a weight had been lifted off me. I thanked Richard for being there and comforting me. I went to bed that night with thoughts heavy on my mind. The most confusing thing was the attraction I felt towards Richard. It was a lot to take in. I batted the thoughts away from my head and slept the first peaceful sleep I had had in a long time. I woke up the next morning refreshed and determined. I was done crying over spilled milk. David had decided to be that type of person, and it wasn't my fault, neither was it my responsibility to make him want me again. I didn't want to burden myself with that again, so I vowed I wouldn't. I walked out of my room in my jogging outfit, and Richard was in the kitchen. He had brewed coffee, and he handed me a cup. I drank it, and a delightful sound escaped me. It was a great cup of coffee. I looked up, and Richard's eyes were heated as he stared at me. I blushed and looked away, convincing myself I was just seeing things. I ran to the gym. In an hour there, when I left, I was wonderfully sore and revitalized. Exercising always made me feel like I could conquer the world. When I got home, the aroma that hit my nose was amazing. It smelled like chicken and some sort of soup. Confused about who was cooking a meal, I walked inside and saw Richard in an apron by the stove. He was so immersed in what he was doing that he didn't notice me walk in. I leaned against the doorframe and watched him. Richard was handsome. I hadn't really allowed myself to see that about him because it felt inappropriate, but now I didn't care. He had a salt and pepper thing going on with his hair. His hair was the darkest blacks, spattered with specks of gray. His jaw was sharp, and his eyes were the greatest I had ever seen. When he focused those eyes on me, I felt like I was put in a spotlight. I stopped staring and cleared my throat. Richard looked up, and his face relaxed when he saw it was me. "That smells wonderful," I said in greeting, and was rewarded with the brightest smile. "Thank you. I'm making chicken garlic soup. I noticed you hadn't had any home-cooked meal, and if anyone deserves one, it's you." I smiled at him and nodded. I hadn't cooked for myself in a long time. Amidst everything, I had to rely on takeouts to nourish myself. This was so kind of him. I told him I wanted to go in and freshen up, and he nodded. I bathed quickly, eager to go and eat. Richard served me the soup with flatbread, and it was so good that I had a second serving. I hadn't noticed as I ate, but Richard had moved his chair close to mine. He sat close to me and watched me as I ate. The way he was looking at me made me shudder. It was an intense stare, and I didn't miss the meaning behind it. His face moved closer to mine, and I closed my eyes, and instinctively, we met in a chaste kiss, and I drew away immediately, with eyes wide. I ran out of the dining room to my room and closed the door behind me. Richard didn't follow after me, as if he knew I needed space. At that moment, it had felt good to be wanted. I was still tingling. The guilt that threatened to overwhelm me arose again, and I sat with my emotions. Richard was my father-in-law that already put us in a precarious situation. I finally realized that I had grown affectionate towards him more than a daughter-in-law should. The world was not the kindest place, and whatever relationship we shared would be shamed and scorned. I admitted to myself that I wanted one with Richard. Did he like me back, or was that just a moment that meant nothing to him? I took a deep breath and walked back out. Richard was sitting in the living room, lost in his thoughts. He had a random channel playing, but I saw that he wasn't paying attention to what was playing. I walked towards him and sat. I took his hand in mine and glanced at him, hoping that my feelings were reflected in my eyes. I wanted him the way I was sure he did with me. I didn't owe Jake anything. He had been horrible to me. I shied away from that fact, but refused to run away from it anymore. I knew people would perceive it as wrong, but I didn't care. I would do what made me happy, and right now, it was allowing myself to be with Richard. We met in an explosion of passion, our bodies collided like two universes, and the blast was widespread. We made it to my room and stared at each other in longing. I had heard it in passing that older men were the best lovers, but I brushed it off. Richard showed me how true it was. His expertise with the female led me to experience sensations I didn't know my body was capable of. What I shared with Jake paled in comparison. That was the best night of my life. We lay in the bed and discussed what we planned to do after we came down from our high. Richard asked me to go back to England with him. I thought about it for a minute. I had grown up in New York, and it would always be a precious city to me, but there was nothing here for me anymore. It took me a minute to decide before I agreed. I left it to him to tell his son. I knew that I would divorce Jake, something he hadn't been man enough to do before he started cheating on me. My life had taken an unexpected turn, but as I lay in Richard's arms, I realized I didn't mind the destination if it had brought me here. The world would have things to say about us, but it would pass. It was a very small price to pay for true love. We would be together, and I couldn't wait for the beginning of our lives. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and if you're curious to see where this journey takes us next, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single update. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and kicking, and every like, comment, and share means the world to us. We've got plenty more stories, insights, and surprises coming your way, so stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.